Last week, we stood on a mountain and watched Peter reach for a hammer. Glory was radiating off of Jesus right in front of him. Moses and Elijah standing there in the flesh, the law and the prophets in the same frame as the Son of God. And Peter's first instinct was to build 3 tents. Not because he was wrong to love what he was seeing, mind you, but because that's what we do when something beautiful appears. We reach for the tools. We try to build something that will hold the moment in place. We try to give glory an address. Sometimes we even try to build it into the structure of our lives, our marriages, our families, our work, our churches, hoping those walls will hold what only God can carry. But God didn't let him finish the sentence. Instead, a cloud came down, a voice spoke, "Listen." And when the cloud lifted, there was no one there but Jesus. No tents, no structure, no way to contain the moment at all. Just Jesus. And then they came down the mountain. This week we come down too, all the way down. Down into the dust and the heat in an ordinary afternoon in Samaria where a woman is walking toward a well at the worst possible hour. Noon. Women usually draw water in the early morning when it was cool and when everyone was there. Coming at noon meant you had reasons not to come when everyone else was around. And this woman, she definitely had reasons. Let me read this to you. We're in Ecclesiastes chapter 4, 7 through 12, and chapter 7, 1 through 4. Here, the preacher is building an argument, and you need to hear the whole thing before the gospel lands the way it should. Again, I saw vanity under the sun. One person who has no other, either son or brother, yet there is no end to all his toil, and his eyes are never satisfied with riches, so that he never asks, "For whom am I toiling and depriving myself of pleasure?" This also is vanity and an unhappy business. 2 are better than 1, because they have a good reward for their toil. For if they fall, one will lift up his fellow. But woe to him who is alone when he falls and has not another to lift him up. Again, if 2 lie together, they keep warm. But how can one keep warm alone? And though a man might prevail against one who is alone, a 3-fold cord is not quickly broken. A good name is better than precious ointment, and the day of death better than the day of birth. It is better to go to the house of mourning than to go to the house of feasting, for this is the end of all mankind, and the living will lay it to his heart. Sorrow is better than laughter, for by sadness of face the heart is made glad. The heart of the wise is in the house of mourning, but the heart of fools is in the house of mirth. See, the preacher in Ecclesiastes has been circling a problem for several chapters now. He calls it vapor. Pleasure, vapor. Achievement, vapor. Wisdom, vapor. Work, vapor. Everything that looks solid eventually slips through your hands if you try to make it hold your life. But here, the preacher names something deeper. Loneliness. A person building a life alone, working, building, accumulating, never stopping to ask the question that eventually cracks the whole structure open. For whom am I doing this? The preacher isn't criticizing ambition. He's diagnosing isolation. 2 are better than 1. If one falls, the other lifts him up. If 2 lie together, they keep warm. But woe to the one who falls alone. And then comes the famous line, "A 3-fold cord is not quickly broken." But the preacher adds something else that people often skip past. He says it is better to go to the house of mourning than the house of feasting, because in the house of mourning, the illusion disappears. Why? You cannot perform there. You cannot manage impressions. You cannot pretend the cord held what it didn't. The house of mourning is where you finally stop pretending vapor was solid. Now let me read you this very long gospel. So he came to a town of Samaria called Sychar, near the field that Jacob had given to his son Joseph. Jacob's well was there, so Jesus, wearied as he was from his journey, was sitting beside the well. It was about the 6th hour. A woman from Samaria came to draw water. Jesus said to her, "Give me a drink," for his disciples had gone away into the city to buy food. The Samaritan woman said to him, "How is it that you, a Jew, ask for a drink from me, a woman of Samaria? For Jews have no dealings with Samaritans." Jesus answered her, "If you knew the gift of God, and who it is that is saying to you, 'Give me a drink,' you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water." The woman said to him, "Sir, you have nothing to draw water with, and the well is deep. Where do you get that living water? Are you greater than our father Jacob? He gave us the well and drank from it himself, as did his sons and his livestock." Jesus said to her, "Everyone who drinks of this water will be thirsty again, but whoever drinks of the water that I will give him will never be thirsty again. The water that I will give him will become in him a spring of water welling up to eternal life." The woman said to him, "Sir, give me this water so that I will not be thirsty or have to come here to draw water." Jesus said to her, "Go call your husband and come here." The woman answered him, "I have no husband." Jesus said to her, "You are right in saying, 'I have no husband,' for you have had 5 husbands, and the one you have now is not your husband. What you have said is true." The woman said to him, "Sir, I perceive that you are a prophet. Our fathers worshipped on this mountain, but you say that in Jerusalem is a place where people ought to worship." And Jesus said to her, "Woman, believe me, the hour is coming when neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem will you worship the Father. You worship what you do not know. We worship what we know, for salvation is from the Jews. But the hour is coming, and is now here, when the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and truth, for the Father is seeking such people to worship him. God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship in spirit and truth." The woman said to him, "I know that Messiah is coming, he who is called the Christ. When he comes, he will tell us all things." Jesus said to her, "I who speak to you am he." Just then his disciples came back. They marveled that he was talking with a woman, but no one said, "What do you seek?" or "Why are you talking with her?" So the woman left her water jar and went away into town and said to the people, "Come, see a man who told me all that I ever did. Can this be the Christ?" They went out of the town and were coming to him. And that, folks, is where the gospel takes us. To a well at noon, to a woman who had spent her life reaching for cords that kept breaking, marriage, belonging, community, 5 husbands. The story doesn't tell us all the reasons, divorce, abandonment, death, we don't know. What we do know is that the cords kept snapping. And now she walks to the well alone at noon. And that is where Jesus meets her. Not in the temple, not at a feast. At the well, in the heat, in the quiet, in the house of mourning. And Jesus is tired. The story makes a point of telling us that. The Son of God is sitting beside a well because he is thirsty, and he asks her for a drink. That moment would have shocked anyone who saw it. Jews did not speak to Samaritans. Men did not address women alone at wells. Before she has even spoken, Jesus has already broken all the rules. And then he keeps on going. He starts talking about living water. She tries to redirect the conversation, first into the logistics, like the well is deep, and then into theology. Which mountain is the correct place for worship? But Jesus, he doesn't follow her into either conversation. He simply tells her the truth. He knows everything, every marriage, every loss, every compromise. And he is still sitting there offering water. Not shame, not even a little bit of shame. Water. Life. And then something small and enormous happens. She leaves her water jar. Remember, she came to draw water. But she leaves the jar behind because something better has interrupted the reason she came. If you've ever seen the scene portrayed in The Chosen, the woman runs back toward town laughing. Not solemn, not composed, giddy. That's what living water looks like when it hits a human life. It doesn't make you quieter. It makes you alive. When Ecclesiastes describes someone reaching for everything under the sun, I recognize that. It was never because I was chasing reckless things. I really was chasing good ones. Family, marriage, work, church, community, my children. I loved those things. I believed in them. And slowly, almost invisibly, I began leaning on them to carry more weight than they were built to hold. Marriage became the place I expected to find safety. Motherhood, the place I expected to find meaning. Work, the place I expected to prove I mattered. Community, the place I expected to be known. And my church, well, that was the place I expected to belong. None of those things are wrong. They're beautiful things. But I was leaning my entire life against them, and when those structures began to crack, I didn't know how to stand without them. That's where Ecclesiastes stops being philosophy and starts being biography. Because when the cords you built your life around begin to snap, the collapse doesn't happen all at once. First there's confusion, then grief, then exhaustion, pure exhaustion. And eventually the moment when the weight of the whole thing breaks something inside of you, well, for me, that breaking looked like alcoholism. It wasn't rebellion or a dramatic spiral. It was just the quiet collapse of a person who had been carrying more than she was built to carry. Everything under the sun. But then something really cool happened. A friend asked if I would come play the piano at his church. I don't think it was because he was trying to restore my faith. I had never lost my faith. He just needed a piano player. And I said yes. Before I could tally the pros and the cons, I heard myself say yes. When I sat down at that piano, I thought I'd forgotten everything, all the cues, all the intros, even the notes. And something strange happened. My hands remembered before I did. 45 years of muscle memory still there, still alive. And suddenly I understood something the woman at the well must have felt when she ran back to town. That wild, barely contained joy. Not solemn, not careful, giddy. Because living water does not feel like solving a theological puzzle. It feels like recognition, like discovering the place you thought you'd lost forever was still waiting for you. And it was right where you left it. My hands remembered the Mass before my heart did. What I found sitting at the piano wasn't just muscle memory, it was the third strand. The one I'd been missing every time I tried to weave something strong enough to hold my life. I had built with marriage and community and work and church 2 strands, always 2 strands. And I'd wondered my entire life why the cord kept breaking. It wasn't the marriage's fault or the church's fault. In a way, the church had even tried to tell me that. In a clumsy, painful, imperfect way. When my marriage ended and I went through the annulment process, a tribunal looked at my 21-year-old self, a woman who had already survived more than they knew, who had been practicing her faith so seriously. And they said she didn't understand what a sacrament was. And that verdict was wrong. But maybe the question underneath it wasn't. Maybe what I hadn't understood was that a sacrament isn't a cord you weave between 2 people. It's an invitation for the third strand to enter. And when he did, through a piano bench, through hands that remembered what my head had locked away, the whole thing held. For the first time, the whole thing held. The woman came to the well alone. She left as a witness, an evangelist even. Not because she'd earned anything, but because she met someone who already knew everything about her and stayed anyway. That still happens. It happens at wells, at pianos, at the worst hours of the day. Everything under the sun is vapor. The word, though, is not under the sun, and that's where the cord begins to hold. We'll keep walking. This is Everything Under the Sun, a Lenten journey through Ecclesiastes. I'm Carrie Kunkel. Stay close.